the record right now. We do have this set up as live. You're not going to, no one's going to get credit for this session unless they're on this live. And frankly, it's because right now the KDA, we don't have the ability in our office really to establish credibility with sending all our members a CE and then, you know, being able to verify that they actually watched it or whatever. So we're working on that. And so maybe someday in the future, it may become an opportunity to watch it and then get credit. But right now, you need to be on the line. So what we'll do is after this session, I'll go back through the attendance list. Our attendance list will show us who was actually logged into this particular meeting. It'll also show us how long you were in the meeting. So don't think you can just be in the meeting here right at the first 5 minutes and then log off and get credit. You need to, you know, your minutes are going to have to be at least somewhat close to the amount of time we were online. So we're going to proceed that way. Let me also tell you that we'll probably get those CE certificates to you next week. We'll have a chance to go through the attendance list, and then Sandra or I will get those lists out, or those CE certificates. So look for those next week. Want to make sure that you all can hear us. So if there's any questions or any concerns with maybe volume or, you know, sound or whatever it might be, you can't see the PowerPoint that Lane has, I mean, do go ahead and send that information in the chat box so we're aware of it, so we can get that corrected. There won't be any breaks tonight. We're going to just go straight through. If you need to run to the restroom, obviously, go ahead and do that. If you want to grab something to eat while we're doing this, we can't see you. You're muted. You're not going to bother us at all. But again, do try to be attentive and pay attention and be involved in the conversation to the best you can. We're not going to throw out any kind of weird polls or chats or anything that you have to do to prove that you were on during the course of the session. But again, it is an ethics CE, so we hope that you're you know, on board and with that and paying attention. Before we get started and I introduce Lane, let me just say we're pretty excited that the Kansas Dental Association, our insurance trust, has just last night met, and we've approved our 2022 rates for the Kansas Association Health Plan. So we're changing the rate structure from what is now a composite structure to age-rated structure, and with that, we're able to be about 7 to 8% below the going rate in the marketplace. So both Blue Cross of Kansas City and Blue Cross of Kansas, for everyone out of the Kansas City area, will be able to get some nice benefits from that. So I know some of you have looked at the plan before. Maybe it wasn't competitive with what you already had. We're very excited about the new rate structure and how that might work. So, hey, please give the KDA a call if you want more information. You can talk to our partners with McGinnis Group. Dennis Maggart and Jane Limbaugh are the two people in our office that, or not in our office, but who we partner with at McGinnis Group. And their number is 913-831-0999. Now, if you email me, or you can find that information actually on our website under our endorsed products as well. But kind of keep that in mind as you're looking right now, probably at your 2022 health plan for your office. Kind of think about that, at least getting a quote and seeing if we might be able to help you out with that. We'd be really excited about that to help you out moving forward. So let's go ahead and get started. We have with us tonight Lane Hemsley. I think most of you, if you don't know Lane directly, you certainly know his name. Lane is the executive director of the Kansas Dental Board. He's been with the Kansas Dental Board for about, well, going on 10 years, almost exactly 10 years now. Lane does have a law degree as well as a master's in public administration. Before he came and to work with the dental board, he actually worked with the law firm that Randy Forbes works with. That's the law firm, or Randy is the attorney for the board. So he was doing work for the board on as an attorney prior to even being the executive director. So he's been around the board and around dentistry for some time. He's going to have a lot of interesting information to share with us tonight. He's going to talk a lot about, you know, how you deal with complaints, how investigations work, so on and so forth. So it's going to have a lot of great information. It's a little bit different than some of the ethics CE, frankly, that we've done before. So it's a little different angle on that. And so I think you're going to get some new information this year that maybe you haven't seen before when the KDA has put together some ethics CE with the past presenters. So with that, Lane, I know that Lane's got some slides. It's going to go through his credentials a little bit more, but so he'll have those if you have any questions about that. But Lane, let's go ahead and introduce him. And Lane, with that, I'm going to turn it over to you and get rolling. And again, don't forget, participants, if you have any questions throughout Lane's presentation, I'm going to warn Lane, I may interrupt you if there's something that comes up that is at a time that's makes sense to interrupt you, I guess, in between your breaths, and then we'll go on from there. So everybody, thank you. Let's welcome Lane Hemsley.
Well, everybody, as Kevin mentioned, for those of you who don't know me, my name is Lane Hemsley. I am the executive director of the dental board. If you ask me how I got to the dental board, I'll give you the long and short version of it, but I'm happy to cover a little bit of ground tonight. You may see, or some of you may recognize, that I'm actually broadcasting live from the Kansas Dental Association's office here at 12th and Huntoon in Topeka. Felt it most appropriate. That way, if we had any technological difficulties, we could bridge the gap pretty easily. So speaking of bridging the gap, I titled this, of course, I used some dental language along the way, but I titled this presentation, Correcting Bad Bites and Bridging the Gap Between Principles of Ethics and the Board. Over the course of the last 10 years, and even preceding that, I had an opportunity to see a lot of things that probably could have been cured before they got to the board office. And so the question came up whether I could provide some continuing education along the way, and had not ever done that before, partly because I had some hesitation, frankly, to be able to communicate with you in a dental arena. As Kevin mentioned, I am not a dentist. I'm an attorney. I only play dentist on Tuesdays and Wednesdays and sometimes Fridays when the calls come in, but I'm not a dentist. But I've been around dentistry now for quite some time. And so I know your language. I probably can't speak your language to the great extent that you can, but what we typically do is the lawyers like me get together with the dentist and they explain it, and then we translate the law, they translate the dentistry, and we all kind of put it all together. So that's typically how it's worked along the way. I have a tendency to talk a little bit folksy, so hopefully that's not a little bit off-putting. If you have any need to have me translate it, please feel free to stop along the way. I know this is a much different scenario. The last one I had an opportunity to do was kind of live in person, so we could kind of banter back and forth a little bit, but please feel free to use that chat session, as Kevin mentioned, and we'll go along the way. Before we get started, I should mention, I've had a great opportunity to look through this list. You have a really robust list. It's truly a veritable who's who of dentistry in your communities and across the state. So I don't know if everybody's on the line yet. Kevin's kind of the host, but I should kind of give a shout out, of course, to the Dental Association's president, Jill Jenkins. I hope she's out there somewhere. Had a chance to chat with Jill on a few different occasions. Always been very, very impressed with the conversational points that we encounter. I should also mention that I see various past presidents of the Dental Association. Forgive me if I overlooked you, but I see Nevin Waters, John Ciabrassi, Kevin Cassidy, David Hamill. So I've had an opportunity to work with or chat with those individuals along the way over the course of the last several years, and always enjoyed those conversations. I should also mention that there might be former or current board members out there, and I would, I would be a bit remiss if I didn't mention them along the way. So out there, I hope somewhere out there from Garden City is Dr. Jeff Stosh. I had an opportunity to work with Dr. Stosh for 4 years, and he did a great job helping us investigate a facility out there that did not have a license. They were practicing illegally, and Dr. Stosh did a great job being deployed and helping us there. Former board member Stan Wendt, he's from the Johnson County area. Dr. Wendt is a periodontist and did a great job on the board's investigative committee for many years, and really provided a great deal of insight and helped me translate a lot of what was necessary. So those are former board members. And for my current board members, I believe I've seen her join the room, Maya Nunley out of Wichita. Dr. Nunley and I think we've met one time in person because of COVID, but I've enjoyed meeting her so far and look forward to seeing her in the future as some of these limitations get lifted. And then I also believe on the list is Lacey Randa, and she's out of Lawrence. She works here at the Grace Med here in Topeka. And so we've been really, really fortunate to grab those two individuals. I should also mention Brendan Farrell. I don't know if he's out there. Dr. Farrell is our oral surgery specialty committee member, or one of the members, and they help us review specialty applicants. So it truly is a veritable who's who of dentistry out there. So I'm glad you all had an opportunity to join us. I hope we were able to recognize everybody along the way. And if I missed you, I apologize in advance. Feel free to drop me a note and we'll give you credit down the line. But thank you so much for joining us. So as Kevin briefly mentioned, we'll kind of get underway here. I'll try to get my screen moving down the road here a little bit and see if I can't get it going. There it goes. Okay, so first and foremost, just out of the gate, I provide that contact information. The image to my left, I presume it's on your screen left as well, is actually the suite of the board office. Now, I should draw attention to most of you at one point had a different suite number. I am actually still getting mail to 564 South. That's not the suite number anymore. That's actually one floor up. That's the building's fitness room now. So where my desk sat is now where treadmills and weightlifting machines sit. So I can use that facility now just one floor up. But so the new suite number, and it's been that way for a few years now, is actually 455 South. That picture there is the Landon building in downtown Topeka. It's immediately to the east of the State House. I point those window banks out. So some of the local Topeka and Lawrence folks have a tendency to come in and visit with me from time to time. So that'll show you your facility there. If you ever have any trouble finding it, we're actually now in the old parole board office. So when you come in, you might see some glass looks a little differently. A couple of individuals were not granted parole, and one in particular slammed the door and shattered the glass in the door frame. So there's a little bit different glass. They weren't able to replace that to the same originality. This is the old Topeka, Atchison, Santa Fe Railway building. But we're in the former parole office. Our intent, of course, is not to get anybody in trouble on that level, but that's the contact information that you have available to you. So hopefully you've all made updates to your calendars and your contact lists and the like to make sure you're hitting the same suite number along the way. Post office is pretty good about it, but sometimes they misfire and send it back. So there's our contact information. And as Kevin mentioned, I get a lot of questions about who I am or where in the world I came from. So I just provide this to you. And I provide this to you for two reasons. First is people want to know where in the world I came from, but secondarily, lawyers are pretty good at the self-aggrandizing phase of life. They're not so great at self-deprecation. So this is the self-aggrandizing phase of my life. So you kind of understand where I came from. I did my undergraduate school and graduate school in Tennessee, where I hail from originally. At the time of me finishing that Master in Public Administration, I'd contemplated working for city governments and the like. My father was a lawyer for the university there and was one of the chief legal consultants for the University of Tennessee. He worked all across the state representing a number of different municipalities, counties, congressmen, senators, and the like. So he was pretty robust in that field and worked in a lot of different capacities. So it drove my interest in both the law and public service. But at the time around 2002, my wife was working for FedEx. Everybody knows that, Global International Shipping Corporation, and she was prepared to move up along the way. And so they came to her and said, hey, listen, you're moving up in the company. And she said, great, but they told her not here. And here being Tennessee at the time. And so she said, well, the timeout, that's a problem. My husband wants to go to law school. And so FedEx was fantastic and came back with a list of possible locations we could land. And they gave us a list. And so we took that list of cities and said, well, hey, we'll just apply for law schools in and around the area. And in all fairness to Washburn and Topeka, I had no idea it existed. It's quite honestly, Topeka was on the list or one of the places that we could land. So we found Washburn and we found, of course, KU and Lawrence. And there were places in Georgia and Florida, Wyoming, Washington State. So there were several locations we could have landed. So we proceeded essentially just to make a list and apply to all the law schools in and around the zones where we might land or where she might be transferred. And so, of course, I applied to some, and some told me no. And of course, we all think, well, if you told me no, you missed out, right? And so that kind of helped narrow the list. And some of the schools told us yes. And so we just tried to figure out where we could land. And so we took a road journey to figure out where we would want to go. And Topeka was on the list. And actually, of all the places, we chose Topeka first because it was kind of in the farther Midwest region of where we were looking, as we would double back to the south and kind of take a look at other opportunities. And when we got to Topeka, we were impressed with both the town because it was small enough to navigate, and certainly impressed with the school. When I arrived at the school, I came unannounced. This was kind of still, internet was still new life, and it wasn't like you made appointments. You just walked through the door. And I happened to walk through the door and knock on the Dean of Students office and said, hey, I'm an applicant. You've told me I could attend school here, and here's my acceptance letter. And I just wanted to take a look around if that was okay. And of all the things that Dean of Students could have done, they could have sent me with somebody else, but that dean stopped everything she was doing and stood up and carried me around the entire campus and spent a great deal of time with us and showed us the options and showed us the build outs of Washburn and the vision for Washburn and how it was going to impact the Topeka community. And Washburn offered something else nobody else in the country offered, and that was in-state tuition after 6 months. So they said, listen, we'll offer you some small scholarships and the like, and we can help you, but we'll give you in-state tuition after 6 months. So you pay the out-of-state freight for the first 6 months, and then you matriculate. And so what they told me was, listen, you have to be here by July 10th of 2002, and you've got to have a driver's license and a voter registration card and a lease. And so we loaded up everything, and we didn't have a whole lot of money like broke dental students, broke law students, broke graduate students have. So we sold virtually everything we had, my car included, and we found a little apartment just south of Washburn University there in South Topeka a little bit. And so I bought a bike at Walmart when we arrived and put that bike together myself and got down to the school, and we landed here on July 9th of 2002. And we drove the U-Haul to the driver's license and voter registration locations before we unpacked the box. So that was the morning of July 10th. And so I rode my bike to school through the wind and the rain and the snow and all the Kansas snowstorms I wasn't used to. But we made the decision to go to Washburn Law after we did some napkin math, or what I called napkin math, in the dental office location of Topeka Smiles. And so I think Topeka Smiles was fairly new at that location, and we decided in that parking lot that that's where we were headed to law school. So you'll see there, like I said, better at self-aggrandizing the self-deprecation, but the law school offered me a large number of opportunities. I competed in moot court competitions around the country. They sent me to Arkansas, and they sent me to Wisconsin, and I argued in various cases there while I was in law school. And you'll see there, I was fortunate to pick up some prizes and some scholarship money along the way. So Washburn has been infinitely supportive of me and really impacted my life. So I owe a lot to Washburn. So I spend a great deal of time talking about how good Washburn was to me. You'll see there that picture is actually the new law school building that's going up on the corner of 21st and Washburn there here in Topeka. So Washburn has been a fantastic opportunity for me. And that led me along the way to a couple of law clerk positions, and those law clerk positions worked with dentists. I worked at one law firm when I was a law clerk, and then I got hired by the law firm when I came out of law school early, got done early, and then I was hired by the law firm that represented the pharmacy board, dental board, and optometry board. Of course, they did civil litigation with wrongful death, car wreck, building collapses, you name it. So I spent 5 years in civil litigation with that law firm. But at the time, the law firm offered me something. They said, hey, look, you know administrative law, and we think you might fit in this area. So I became the disciplinary counsel for those boards I just mentioned. And then, of course, I began representing doctors in front of the Board of Healing Arts, nurses in front of the nursing board, accountants, and you name it, most licensed professions I've represented in front of their various agencies or prosecuted. And the reason that fascinated me is because as a young lawyer, probably much like a young dentist, you have a hard time getting in front of a courtroom or getting some of the larger cases. This gave me a fast opportunity to get trial experience that I wouldn't otherwise have. in civil cases. So that's how I got fascinated in administrative law. And so I spent roughly 5 years kind of cutting my teeth, as it were, there. And then the state called me and said, hey, listen, I was spending some time in addition to representing individuals in front of their boards and prosecuting those, but I was also suing the state. So the state called and said, would you quit suing us and come to work for us? And so the state hired me, and I worked for the state in another legal department for about 3 years. And then the former dental board director went to resign, and I bumped into the then existing board president in the hallway of that building. And he said, hey, we need a new board director. You ought to apply, and we'll make it open and fair, but we think you'd be a good candidate. So long story short, I took over the board about a decade ago. So that's how I landed at the dental board. So I've got a great deal of experience in administrative law and dental land. So thought you kind of might like to know that back history, because a lot of people have asked me over the years, how in the world does somebody that knows nothing about Kansas or Kansas law or Kansas dentistry land at the Kansas Dental Board? So there's kind of your backstory. I thought it might fill the gap a little bit for many of you out there landing that don't know anything about me. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more background from that. You'll see I have those court admissions there just to kind of give you a flavor. I graduated in December of 2004 with honors in an early program from Washburn Law. And then, you know, unlike say REB and credits and some of the regional testing agencies, the Kansas bar exams only offered twice a year. So they offer it in February and July. So if you fail the first time, you better come up with plan B fast. Well, fortunately, I took the February bar of 2005 and was quite successful. The court gave me my licenses and cut me loose. And then I picked up another license in front of the 10th Circuit Court of Appeals, which governs several federal courts across the Midwest region. That court in the 10th Circuit is immediately under the United States Supreme Court. So I have those 3 law licenses unencumbered and have held those all throughout the course of my career with the dental board as well. I think it gives the board an extra tool in its arsenal as people call and they want legal advice or need legal insight. So with that as background and kind of give you a longer road to the background, I really wanted to cover the ground with 4 things. These are the 4 things I've typically seen or had inquiries about along the way of my 10-year journey with the board. Some of your journeys may not have been 10 years. Many of you are going on 40, 30, 40 years. And so these are the types of things I've seen overlap on. So I think we'll just cover each one in its particular order. First, I'll start with the position of the board. Then we'll discuss the powers and duties of the board. Then I'll tie those into the principles of ethics and the code of professional conduct. I think in point 3 there, many of you have either been to a continuing education course or provided CE courses on those topics. And I wanted to show you that those topics weren't just codes and ideals. Those are actually not only codes, but they've been codified. That is to say, they've been put in Kansas law. So while you may be thinking you're just reading the KDA Code of Ethics, those are actually Kansas laws too. And I wanted to be able to bridge the gap between that ethics book and the law book so you understand how those came to be and what those principles are. And then the 4th one, of course, is pandemic presumptions. I don't think the last couple of years it would be appropriate to skip over at least some of the presumptions that many of you may have encountered, some of the presumptions that I would like to dispel, because many of those aren't really how the way things went down. So I think you guys would like to know, probably get a little more flavor for how that went out. So again, as we get underway, I just should remind you, please feel free to raise your hand or holler out to Kevin, and he can stop me anytime and we'll pause for questions. But let's start with the position of the board. So I kind of use a 5-point structure for really how the board kicks off. And one of those courses is starting point. Then I like to give you the structure of the board, its staff, its budget, and its support. I've talked to many of you out there for many, many years, and many of you, in all fairness, through no fault of your own, don't know some of these features. And so I've tried to fill the gap. I'm working on filling the gap so you understand where your fees go, where your license renewal fees, where your applications fees go, and where all that money ends up, because sometimes I get the calls, hey, you just got money from me last year or the year before. Well, I'm happy to show you where it ends up. So let's just start with those premises first. So the starting point for the board, of course, is anybody can see this. The mission of the board is to ensure and protect dental health by enforcement of the Kansas dental laws. That's the whole reason the board exists. It's intended to support and enforce all the laws that are found in the Kansas Dental Practices Act. Some of you are a little more up to speed on that than others, and that's fine. Everybody starts at a different place. Some of you, unfortunately, have had experiences with the board that you'd rather not repeat. Others of you may have had an investigation. So that's the starting point for the board. Of course, in our objectives, or the philosophy, is to attain that standard of ethics, quality of care, and professional accountability. Because like law, pharmacy, optometry, you name a licensed profession, mine included, as I mentioned, dentistry and so on, this is a self-regulating profession, notwithstanding the fact that all of these are appointed positions and the legislature has declared the outlines for the board self-regulates you, and you self-regulate one another. So it's incredibly important to know those kind of two starting points along the way. So with those starting points in mind, here's the structure of the board. Some of you have experienced the board, some of you may have no experience, and it's okay either way. But the board comes with 9 members, and those numbers right behind there, that KSA 74-1404, that's actually the legal standard for that, the structure of the board. And I brought those, and we'll mention them again later, but just so you know, when you see in the Kansas Dental Practices Act, I'm holding up this big red book for those of you who are on video. This book right here, this is a KSA, Kansas Statutes Annotated. It's what the lawyers call the red book. This book is created by the Kansas legislature. The board can't create these. So the 9-member structure of the board is from this book right here in my hand. And the code that I have in my hand is chapter 5 of that book, but that governs the Kansas dental laws, and it's really public health. So it has all the state licensing acts for public health. So that law is there. This book, the one I'm bringing around with me here, this is the white book. It's the KARs. It's the Kansas Administrative Regulations. The board can make the laws found in here for the dental board. They can't make the red book. So we'll talk about both of those different books along the way, and I'll fill you in on some of the gaps. But that's the board structure. So the board structure has 6 dentists. Of course, there are 4 members from congressional districts, 2 at-large members, so it can be any dentist across the state. There are 2 hygienists and 1 public member. Our public member now is a former hospital administrator. So he's been fantastic to work with on the board because he gets a lot of the healthcare standards. And so he has no slow uptake or no inability to understand what's occurring in a boardroom. So he's been really a great addition to the board. Now, so you understand how board members take their terms. The governor actually has the power to appoint those members, and there's just another statute along the way. So you can see this is all codified, it's all law. Each term for a board member is 4 years, and board members can only serve a maximum of 2 consecutive 4-year terms. So some board members have bounced back and forth, and some have been appointed 1 term and some of the other. Boards can create committees along the way, but let me just bounce back to point number 2 briefly. I should mention that with gubernatorial appointments, this is not universally true, but it's certainly been more of my experience, or more often than not, when the governor goes to appoint board members, not always, but more probable than not, if a governor that wears what I say blue jacket, or typically a Democratic governor, has a tendency to appoint Democratic board members. There's nothing wrong with that. That's the spoils of winning those positions, as it should be. That's the way the law is set up. In the same vein, red governors, Republican governors, have a tendency, not always, but they'll have a tendency to appoint Republican board members. Again, those are not universal standards. I've seen governors do both things and hold people over that were Democrats and hold them over even as Republican governors. And I've seen it work both directions. Definitely not universal. That's just general standards. Now, having said that, the reason there are only 2 maximum 4-year terms is because that kind of coincides with gubernatorial limitations, where a governor could only serve 8 years in total if he or she won 2 consecutive 4-year terms. So this allows for governors, and it's across the board for all state licensing agencies. This allows for those governors to appoint the people in place that they feel appropriate for those positions. So it's a unique role and one that I think all governors take seriously. I've worked with the appointment office in many, many different capacities. So every board member that sits on the board, I've talked to the governor's office about because they typically ask for information along the way about those particular board members. So it's not offered in a vacuum, but the gubernatorial office and the governor has final swing on who gets those seats. And they notify me and we notify those particular appointees. Now, as I mentioned briefly, the board can create committees as needed. And so the board does create committees from time to time, sometimes a continuing education committee, sometimes a regulatory committee. Say, for example, the last committee for that was the regulatory committee for sedation permits and the sedation regulations that took many, many years to unfold. I worked on those for quite some time. But the standing committee, or one of the standing committees, the one that gets the most play and attention is the investigative committee of the board. It is the internal standing committee. And those are the two associated statutes that allow the board sitting in full, in bank, in full, all 9 members to appoint this standing committee. And typically the board president is also the chair of that investigative committee. So that individual right now is Dr. Mark Herzog. He's based out of Ellsworth. He holds the board's president seat and the chair of the investigative committee. That's how the board has deemed that appropriate, because he's my main contact and my direct line of communication with the board when the board is not in full session. That committee gets a lot of play. Of course, the specialty committees are the external standing committees of the board. So we have specialty committees that will review the credentials of individuals who apply to be, say, like Dr. Jenkins, a pediatric specialist, or like Dr. Farrell, he's my specialty committee individual for oral surgeons, as I mentioned at the outset. So those individuals will assist us in reviewing those candidates or those committee members. So that's the structure of the board. So let's talk about board staff. There's often kind of a misunderstanding, and rightfully so, about how many board employees there are. Well, you're looking at 1/3 of the board employees now if you're on the video feed. So there's really just 3 board staff. And so there's me, you'll see on your screen there, I'm the director. The board appoints that position and the governor has to approve the board appointees. So when I applied for that position and went through the entire interview process and the like, my name was sent to the governor's office and I received the gubernatorial appointment for that position. And so that role occurs with all licensing agencies. The governor has the final power. I've been fortunate. I think this is my 5th governor that I've served under, worked with them and around them and their staff for some time. So I've been very, very fortunate to have an inside line to both the State House and the administrative agencies, or what you would broadly more consider the bureaucracy. So I've seen both sides of the machine work. It's a fascinating operation. Of course, I oversee the day-to-day operations, and the law appoints me as legal custodian of everything that's in the possession of the board, from the money coming in to the furniture and everything else. As I mentioned before, and I'll probably iterate several times along the way, I am an attorney. I'm not a dentist. My first week, as kind of side note, my first week as the director, I don't think I'd been there 3 days. A young dentist called me and he began to start talking to me about one of the procedures he was contemplating undertaking. And it dawned on me about 1/3 of the way through our conversation that this young dentist actually had the patient in the chair. And so I stopped the young dentist. I said, hey, time out, doctor. Please tell me you don't have the patient in the chair. And this dentist proceeds to explain to me, oh yeah, the patient's in the chair. I'm just getting ready to undertake the procedure. I just wanted to make sure this was the right route. What would you prefer? And he started to proceed to tell me, hey, I was thinking about taking the lingual approach. I don't like the buccal approach as well. Of course, buccal, your cheek side, as everybody can more adequately educate than me. And of course, it caused me a little disconcern or caused me a great deal of concern, and not disconcern, I should say. And I advised the young dentist, I said, hey, by chance, is your supervising dentist down the hall? He says, yes, he is. I just didn't want to go down and ask him this question. I said, well, if I answer this question, you and I are both going to end up without a job by 5 o'clock today. So please go ask your supervising dentist. what's going on. So I can't emphasize enough that I'm not a dentist. So I'm not the right guy to call if you have a procedure, whether the patient's in the chair or whether you're prepping for the procedure. But I can certainly get you in touch with many, many people who would be more than happy to bounce your procedural ideas off of one another. Secondarily, the administrative officer there, all the statutes are cited. So these are all statutory appointments and positions along the way. My administrative officer is Charity Carlett. She's been with me for over 7 years. I hired her from a law firm here in Topeka, and she's done a bang up job here. She always jokingly complains that she's the bad cop in the office because she's the investigation specialist. So if any of you have either been under investigation or have encountered a board investigation, most of your initial contacts are with her. And she doesn't do it out of spite for you. She does it because that's her statutory obligation in her job. And she also kind of runs interference between our sanitation inspectors and our sanitation database. Lastly is our licensing specialist. That's now Katie Mulkey. There was another individual who held that position for many, many years. That person is no longer with the board office. So Katie is a new addition to the board, and she's done a great job getting up to speed. She's our senior administrative assistant. So if you have any continuing education requests, any license verifications, or you're trying to get some kind of license permit or specialty, Katie will be your main contact. So there's the structure of the board. And then lastly, or not lastly, but just along those lines, structure of the board budget. So this is where your money goes. So when you send us permit application fees, extended care permit fees, your license renewal fees that many of you will be due for renewals along the way, we are a fee-funded agency. It's what the state government calls an off-budget agency. So when the board's budget goes into the giant budgeting machine, while it's on one page of the board's budget, it doesn't typically get included in the big behemoth budget that everybody would see on the evening news about the legislature passing some $16.5, $17 billion budget. It's kind of buried there. It's off budget, as it were. So we're not an SGF agency, meaning we're not state general fund agency. That state general fund agency is when you go to Walmart or Target or, go to Sonic and buy you a cheeseburger or something. Those are point of sale transactions where you would be taxed on that particular transaction. The board gets none of that money. We are entirely funded with the fees that you pay to us. 90% of those fees, or 90 cents out of every buck, are deposited into the board's operational account, and 10% or a dime of every dollar is deposited into the SGF, State General Fund. So you get the benefit of the state of Kansas flag when you donate 10 cents of every dollar you pay to me, essentially, for your operation. And that 10 cents of every dollar goes out to Roads and Hayes, somebody that might need assistance in elderly care home somewhere, or somebody on the Medicaid program or the like. So your money is helping people along the way that might not otherwise have the capability to help, or that's just for the greater good of the broad banner of the state. So as I mentioned, no state general funds are used for the board operations. We take none of that money. You support yourself, not only you self-regulating, but you are self-sustaining. So there are not many state agencies that are built this way. Most state agencies are state general funds. So to the extent that you can be proud of your capability to self-regulate and self-sustain, I think it's a phenomenal achievement. That budget, while it requires legislative approval, you have, through your licensing groups, been able to sustain this operation since its inception. So that you should be very, very proud of that, that you don't have to ask for state general fund money or point of sale transactions to sustain your operations through the board. So that's the board. And then here's the board's support. So the board has a contract attorney. Those attorneys are bid out. There's another statute there. That's my red book of laws. We build that out under certain acts. So every 5th year that contract comes up and we'll put a bid out through a bidding department. And that bid will go to the lowest responsible bidder. Because I previously worked for the law firm that now holds that contract, I cannot be involved in that. So if you want to talk ethics, there's one of your ethical components along the way. I can't be involved in that selection process. So I actually have to designate that I have a conflict and that conflict cannot be repaired in any way and that I cannot be involved. And so what I do is I'll sign a sheet with the bidding office that says I have that conflict and they maintain that from ethical standards. The Governmental Ethics Commission requires that, as does a number of many different laws. So that's how that goes down. So if anybody has any concerns, I just can't be involved in that process. That attorney handles disciplinary proceedings and general inquiries for the board. So they're at all the board meetings, and any of the disciplinary actions that we might take or the investigations that are unfolded, that attorney does those, or that law firm does those. We also have a contract dentist along the way. Many of you may know that particular dentist. His name's Dr. Steve Johnson. He's in the Johnson County area. His contract is bid out the same way. Now, because I'm not a dentist and I've not previously worked for him in any capacity, I can be involved in the selection of that particular contract. He performs sanitation and sedation inspections. He also investigates complaints. So as I always do with all of those, I try to make sure you see the legal codification. So everything parenthetically is my red book, KSA, Kansas Statutes Annotated. These are all laws that the Kansas legislature deemed appropriate for the operation of the dental board. So all those are laid out appropriately along the way. Of course, the KAR is the one the dental board declared for sanitation and sedation inspections. That was appropriate, but the legislature empowered the board to promulgate or create that regulation. So all of that is kind of your board structure. I created this years ago. An a legislative committee asked me to identify the board's hierarchy and the board's, as it were, chain of command. So I laid this out for the legislature so they had a better idea of how the input goes in and the output goes out of the board. So you'll see the dental board members are the top of the food chain of this operation. The independent contract attorney and the contract dentist feed the board information, and then the board provides directives or decisions for the director there, which is me, of course, in the middle, and then those directives are fed down as I deem appropriate to the appropriate staff, who can either handle it based on time or skill set or a little bit of both. So that's the hierarchy and chain of command for the board. Board members that have worked currently with me or in the past, that's how they understand and how the operational flow works. So that's kind of the first point. I like to stop at each phase there. So that's kind of phase one of the operation. Does anybody have any questions about that layout? I don't know if Kevin's got any along the way. That just kind of gives you a backdrop. Anybody got any questions of the structure or the operation of the board?
Lane, I'm not seeing any questions at this point about that, so.
Oh, great. So we'll just power on then. Okay. Well, so secondarily, so here's the powers and duties of the board. So not only is the structure important, but I think your powers and duties of the board are more important. The board, of course, its primary function is to license. Then it implements legislation and promulgates, meaning it creates or adopts regulations. And then the legal component is what gets the most play. Those are the disciplinary investigations and actions. So we'll cover each one of those in turn. First is licensing. Of course, I didn't provide a green card. I know all you dentists are on green cards. That's a blue one, but that's a screenshot from your online license renewal. Now, I don't know. I haven't gone through my attendee list tonight, but of the attendees here, I believe some of you are odd numbered licensees. Your license is due for renewal. It's fast closing. So hopefully this 2 hours of ethics gets you along the way. Same for your hygienist or anybody that's under your direct or general supervision. The dentist, briefly, I like to show the first license was granted in Kansas on September 12th of 1885. I actually have the original licensing book to that effect in the original entry of that date. So those were cowboy dentists. One of the dentists at the last time I prepared this and provided this continuing education course asked me if I had any idea what dentistry looked like prior to 1885, and I kind of jokingly quipped that I believed it was probably a shot of whiskey, a stick, and a sharp object. It's probably not too far off prior to licensing. So you'll see the original licensing dates there. I like to give you a screenshot of the total number of licensees for dentists and your new licensees in 2020 or calendar year 2020. And the last point I should point out, and we'll talk about this a little bit more, is the Modern Dental Practices Act. And I use that kind of, of course, quotations, because what's occurring in dentistry now, as you well know, and what might be occurring in the Dental Practices Act always doesn't line up. And so the challenge, of course, is the Dental Practices Act, or the most modern version, was adopted in 1943. That's not to say that was the last pinpoint or pivot point of laws. The laws have been changed many, many times, but the inception of the Dental Practices Act was right in the throes of World War II. So it kind of give you an idea that you're closing in on, almost, 80 plus years, or around 80 years of this Dental Practices Act having some format or another. Same with the dental hygienists. You'll see those pertinent numbers there. They were picked up at the same time by that particular legislature and governor in 1943. So that's what we do primarily in the dental board office, is the heavy lifting for licensing and granting permits. Now, this is where the modern Dental Practices Act of 1943 meets modern day dentistry, or what dentistry looks like even more so. And this is really where Kevin and your team here at the KDA comes in, because they are your lobbying and advocacy team in front of the Kansas legislature. It's a good team, and I think they have a phenomenal reach. And so I think your resources and your directives there are well spent. And frankly, I'd say the same thing about the Kansas Dental Hygiene Association. Wouldn't want to leave them out either. Organized dentistry and organized dental hygiene is really how these things happen. And the rules get changed in my red book, the Kansas Statutes Annotated. So you, through the Board of Delegates and the legislative arm of the Dental Association, and Kevin's spectacular legislative advocacy down at the State House every year, has led you to some changes in that Dental Practices Act. Now, I like to always point out that when you go to implement legislation, I call it the general rule of 63, 21, and 1. And that means in order to get something changed in the red book, and I'll bring it up again, this is this big fat red book here for the lawyers in the batch, or for you who understand what's happening or want to understand more clearly what happens on the legislative advocacy side. This red book is what you seek to change when you go to change something in front of the legislature, because something doesn't fit with modern dentistry relative to the 1943 Dental Practices Act. So you need 63 state representatives, you need 21 state senators, and 1 governor to get your proposed ideas across the line. And so you'll see here that that there was some successes along the way, or modifications along the way. One of those was franchise dentistry. Another was, I think, probably more importantly, or more home to some of those who might be working in FQHCs, like a few of our board members, the extended care permits along the way. You'll see that, oh gosh, I was involved in this one with Kevin. Kevin did a great job getting this next one across the line. We had a widower in Peabody, which is outside of Newton. It's not the most robust populace in the state. And her husband passed away, and she had trouble finding a buyer for her practice. So for those of you in some of the more rural areas of the state, because of course our state is suburban, urban, and rural, for those of you in the rural areas, when you have a problem, or if you have a widow or widower of a dental practice, whether it is a projected death of a particular dentist or a sudden and unexpected death of a particular dentist, your estate has a minimum of 18 months to hold that practice, hire locum tenens dentist to maintain that practice while you seek a buyer or you seek to close. Now, if you have trouble over the course of that 18 months, you can petition the board, and typically you just write a letter or an email to me that says you need another 6 months, and you can get a maximum of 2 6-month extensions along the way. So that particular individual, I think they took around 23, 24 months to sell that practice. That's a neat win for the rural areas. And I think it's one that has a tendency to get overlooked, but it's one that I get calls about more often than you might anticipate. A young or even aging dentist might die, and we've had, unfortunately, a few of those along the way, and I get a call from the family that says, I have no idea what to do with this dental practice. I haven't a clue. And so I think there's a unique opportunity there, perhaps for some of the KDA to kind of look at that and see if, and they do, they've done a great job bridging the gap between that deceased dentist and the family. And there's some particular individuals that work with the KDA that can kind of help market those practices and the like. So unique opportunity there. And then the last one I should mention for legislation is the 20% rule. That was formerly the majority presence rule, or what we call the 50% rule. That's since changed. That law, that 65-1436 subsection D, as in Delta, or dentistry for that matter. Delta might not be a favored phrase these days with COVID, but 65-1436 subsection D, that 20% rule essentially means a few years ago, one of the now sitting board members had practices in Missouri and Kansas and wanted to expand the footprint to kind of keep up with the franchise dentistry operation. So that was changed. So now that law essentially says that if you own more than one dental practice in the state anywhere, you're required to be there at least 20% of the time that the practice is providing services to patients. So before it was every minute the lights came on 50% of the time. So this is, they can be doing administrative work or supervising the hygiene department or providing direct restorative care. That's a unique change. And it's interesting, I've still gotten questions about how that rule plays out in some of the rural areas. So if you have questions or your colleagues have questions, please feel free to reach out and we can kind of get you along the way. But I thought that was a unique win. It also requires Kansas dentists to have skin in the game with respect to your practices. That was the negotiated position at the time, and it seems to have worked so far. So you've made some of those changes through your advocacy arm or made some modifications to catch up with some of the legislative changes. The second one is the board through its legislation can promulgate regulations. And by that you can, what I call the general rule of 5, because there are 9 board members, you need 5 board members to approve these changes. So this goes back to my white book. So this is the book that the board has the power to change if the legislature gives them the power in the red book. Now the legislature is already vested with the board with a great deal of power because the board is experts, you as dentists are experts in your field. So the board has power to promulgate regulations in a large number of areas. One of the most recent ones, for those of you out here who may not have caught it or just getting up to speed on it, at least 5 board members approved sedation permit inspections. Those have started to unroll out across the state. But the larger changes, the then existing oral surgeon on the board determined after consultation with ABOMS, the Board of Oral Surgeon Specialties there, that capnography was now the standard of care for level 2 and level 3 sedation permits. So the board made changes to its regulations. So if you out there in listening land hold a level 2 or level 3 sedation permit, you are required by state law now to deploy a capnograph in all of those procedures. So it is required. I think we've caught most everybody, but if we've missed you along the way, please make immediate arrangements to deploy a capnograph. If you have questions, we can get you to the right dentist or oral surgeons. Your oral surgeons would be spectacular resources, even your periodontists, many of whom hold level 2 permits, to deploy those capnographs. So I would encourage you to do that. But that's your legislation piece. Now, this is the legal piece. This is the one that gets really the most play and where I spend a great deal of my time. So this can be a kind of a challenging operation for the board. It can be challenging for those of you who have encountered an investigation or some challenge along the way. So I think it's important to talk about how the board looks at investigations and how the investigative process unfurls itself. And so this is, by and large, it's a statutory obligation of the board. So the board doesn't really get the opportunity to say, well, we're not overly interested in that complaint. The standard or the bar for reviewing a complaint is low, and it's low intentionally because the law obligates this review. So if a patient of yours files a written complaint, and I require a written complaint, not a telephonic complaint, I won't take anybody that got upset over a bill or something and they called me and say, I'm mad at Dr. Smith out there and wherever because he charged me too much or she was mean to me or whatever. We just don't do that. We require a written complaint because you're entitled to a copy of that written complaint. We have the complaint forms on our website. We also mail those out to individuals. It's a statutory obligation that I have or a legal obligation to provide any complaint resources to an individual who has a complaint against you or any of your colleagues. We don't go hunting for these. I don't go looking for complaints. We're a complaint-driven operation in the legal field. So for that purpose, I'm obligated to provide the resources available, however the particular complainant would like those resources provided. So the complaint's really, it's a 2-page complaint. We don't provide them a lot. A lot of times people will add additional information or additional pages. We like them to understand that we're going to ask you, if you're the recipient of a complaint, for a copy of your entire record. But in order to do that, what I said a minute ago is the bar is low for investigating. And by that, I mean, when somebody files a complaint with me in my office, and the board's investigator, the contract dentist investigator, and one member of the board's investigative committee reviews each of those complaints, whatever format they come in, and they answer 2 questions, and only 2 questions, not substantive. They just look at it for structure. And that is to say, they ask 2 questions. First, does this complaint pertain to dentistry at all? Is this anything dentally related? And if that answer is yes, then the investigator and the board's, at this point, the chair or one member of the board's investigative committee answers the next question. Does this complaint allege facts that constitute a possible violation of the Dental Practices Act? Not does it confirm, or is it valid, or does the person that is the subject of the complaint deserving of any disciplinary action? We just answer those 2 questions. If the answer to those 2 questions when a complaint is received by me in my office is yes, the investigator and the investigative committee chair will authorize my office to open a complaint. I don't pick and choose. I know has been in the past some confusion, and that's okay. It's well-placed confusion about whether or not I get to make a decision. Well, of course, I'm not your dental peer. I'm just the director and an attorney. So you get a true dentist to dentist review on those 2 grounds only. And the bar is low intentionally because the law says we have to investigate those complaints. So if I get back a yes, Lane, open a case, we just tag it with a number because that's what we've been told to do. And then at that point, we open a formal investigation. Now, when that happens, the dentist or the hygienist named in the complaint, you're notified in writing of that particular complaint. So we tell you, and we'll write you a letter, it's a fairly stock letter that says, Dear Dr. Smith, Dear Dr. Jones, or whoever's out there on the tail end or the backside of that complaint, here's what's going on, here's the copy of the complaint. Now, when you receive that, or if you received that, or if you have received that, 2 things happen for you. It triggers your due process rights. So I'm not talking about due process rights like you could go to jail or you're going to be in a criminal case immediately. This is an administrative case between the board, which holds your license, and you as a licensee. The reality is, under Kansas law, the privilege to practice dentistry does not constitute a property right. So this is a little bit different. So if the county, let's say, for example, you had a property in Western Kansas, if the county comes along and says, we're going to run a highway through your land, well, you have rights, property rights. That's different. This is a privilege right. So you don't get the same rights as property rights. So while there's still due process available, it looks differently in this regard. So my acronym there, KDBPA, Kansas Dental Practices Act, you have due process rights, you're entitled to a hearing. That other acronym, CAPA, is the Kansas Administrative Procedure Act. And then you'll see parenthetically all the laws that go with that. And then that third one, KJRA, is the Kansas Judicial Review Act. So you have due process rights in front of the board with the Dental Practices Act. CAPA is the Administrative Procedure Act. You're entitled to a neutral judge, and the board can decide whether it wants to sit and hear the case, or it can appoint an administrative law judge, which is a different state agency. And then if you don't like what's happened in front of those 2 places, you can actually go to the district court. But these are all sequential. So you got to go to the board and then get a judge, and then go get a district court judge if you don't like the outcome. Now, you can hire an attorney at any time if you are concerned about this and you have serious concerns because something that might be considered out of the ordinary in your office has occurred. this is the time to hire a lawyer. Now, I'm not saying you have to, I'm not requiring that you hire a lawyer at this phase, but this would be the time, because I can't tell you how many different occasions I've had where the dentist tries to go it alone immediately and finds out they're outmatched because they've got me working, and then they've got the board's legal attorneys or the legal counsel working for the board, and you're trying to do it on your own. There's nothing wrong with doing it on your own, but in all fairness, I wouldn't do my own root canal, so I strongly encourage you, don't do your own legal work, particularly in this regard, because you are entitled to all sorts of rights. And if you provide me a response and then later try to retract that with a lawyer, it's not going to go over well because I've already got the information. So I don't say that to scare you. I just say, if you get something like that, you think it rises the level of needing an attorney, you might want to hire one, because you're going to be facing attorneys. And that's just the way the system is set up. Now, as the investigation unfolds, we can require on-site inspections. They can be scheduled or surprise. We can do witness interviews, record reviews, and we even consult with law enforcement. That happens more often than you think. Local sheriff's office or a police department gets involved. As the investigation unfolds, you will provide us a written response. Our investigator will review it for dental issues, and that investigator will provide a summary report. And then the board's investigative committee, what I call the IC there, will review those reports with the board's attorney and its staff. At that review, the board's investigative committee, which is 3 members of the board, there are 9 board members in total, but we appoint 3 members to form this investigative committee. They can close the case with no finding and just say, hey, there's just not enough here. We don't find any violation of the Dental Practices Act. They can issue you a letter of concern or instruction about the things that they found that were in some way possibly inadequate, but did not rise to the level of implementing or imposing disciplinary action. They can propose a disciplinary settlement with a stipulation. That's a proposed agreement where we negotiate with you about the way we want this to finish up. Or we can file an emergency order or a disciplinary petition. Those are 2 different things. An emergency order or a disciplinary petition, if we file either one of those against you, I would definitely get a lawyer then. I would not wait for anything more, because we're going to schedule a hearing. And we call those adjudicative hearings. That's a legal term, as you all well know. And we schedule a hearing, and you're going to come talk to the board in full about anything, and it's going to be a full-on trial. So I believe I have a couple board members on the line that sat through a trial this past April. It was a long trial. It took about 12 hours. So evidence, witnesses, judges, and the whole bit. So those are a couple of scenarios that can unfold. So of those types of investigative cases along the way, I was asked years ago by a different legislature, what in the world, or how does the disciplinary investigations unfold, or what happens, and what were my findings? So I've done this now, oh gosh, 16, 17 years. And this is really, how I've made a career. And so I've I've prosecuted hundreds of cases on behalf of state agencies, and I've defended hundreds of other cases. So, and I've been involved in many, many other investigations. So like you, at some point along the way, you think you will remember them all, and I regret that I don't. But once you get over 1,000 root canals or extractions, or 2,000 or 3,000, and that's probably where I am somewhere, probably all start looking the same in some respect or another, despite the fact that they may have factual dissimilarities. But be that as it may, I call these the 5 Ds of discipline. So if I were to tell you what are the common threads or the common themes, and I'll just bring them all up here, the common themes along the way, if you can see that screen there, this is what I see over and over and over again. It didn't matter if I was representing a medical doctor in front of the Board of Healing Arts who was in trouble with his license, or a nurse who was in trouble with hers, or prosecuting a wayward dentist or some other malefactor who had been involved in some challenges along the way. These are the 5 different types of discipline I see repeatedly. And so we call these the 5 Ds of discipline: drugs and alcohol, difficult dental results, which I call, those are kind of where you land below the applicable standard of care. Let's say kind of a common one that I see is pulling the wrong teeth. That would be below the applicable standard of care. If you aim for 16 and you pull 17 and 18, well, I think it speaks for itself. You've not landed at the applicable standard of care. Other dentists have been disciplined in another state. Deceit is another D of discipline. That is, you've lied or in some way been fraudulent about obtaining a license, money, or other thing of value. And that other thing of value is referrals, it's facilities, it's office equipment, you name it, I've seen it. And then the last one is disastrous personal decisions. This one's kind of a catch-all. This is if somebody had engaged in or created a crime of moral turpitude. That's kind of loose language, so that's wide-reaching for the board, or some other pattern of incompetent behavior. Now, my experience in all of these, whether I'm prosecuting or defending licensees in front of their respective agencies, has been that I don't typically see one of these without one or more of the others. So for example, if I see drugs and alcohol, I'm probably going to see difficult dental results. Or if I see difficult dental results, I will likely see some disastrous personal decision that somebody's made along the way. So these are not mutually exclusive issues. Now, I cite all those statutes to say, all those statutes there, that 65-1436 subsection A as an alpha, that's what the lawyers are looking for. We want to see if we can tie any results or any outcome of a particular case to that particular statute. That's in the red book. That's the board disciplinary statute. So as these statutes are being looked at or unfurled for the lawyers, the reality is the investigative committee has this tough balance. And I can speak from personal experience and talk on behalf of many of those investigative committee members, a couple of whom may be on the line right now. This is not an easy job. This is a job where you have to decide whether a dental peer, some of whom may have been known to you for many, many years. So these investigative committee members really grapple with this seesaw, or this teeter-totter balance. They have to decide whether it's retribution in the name of the public, you'll see on the right side there, public retribution, or rehabilitation for the practitioner. And this teeter-tot I've seen goes back and forth. And this is an enormous struggle for the practitioners on the investigative committee, but it's a healthy struggle. And I don't say it's a bad struggle. It's actually a good struggle. The committee members have been appointed by the governor and their dental board peers to struggle with the decision of whether a practitioner can be rehabilitated, even if it's a negotiated settlement, or if the practitioner is too far gone and they have to receive some kind of retribution, up to and including license revocation. And that's the harshest act, of course, in the name of the public. So I've watched personally thousands of these cases go by my desk and watch these committee members struggle with this balance. And so please know that the committee that's been appointed to this role takes the role incredibly seriously. I've never seen anybody reach a decision flippantly or without having adequate information. So they get enormous amounts of information and they have to consume that information from my office, and they have to decide which route is appropriate under each particular case. So every case, like your root canal, like your malocclusion, like your extraction, every one of those issues is factually sensitive. Despite the fact that it may be tooth number 18, 18 is going to look different in Sally's mouth than it is in Johnny's mouth. Well, the same thing applies here. Dr. Smith versus Dr. Jones may have two different scenarios unfold here. This is a tough balance. So having said that, people always ask me, tell me about some cases. So this is real-time application. Now, I will warn you that I've named these practitioners not to shame them in any way, but the reality is some of the practitioners I've named up here have had their licenses revoked. These are long coming cases. This is all public record. So everything that I tell you on these particular slides is not any investigation that's hidden. I am not allowed to talk about any ongoing investigations that I may have in my office or on my desk or anywhere around the facility. Investigations that are not finalized are not public record. Investigations that are finalized that result in public disciplinary action like this particular licensee, that's public record. If any of you have been subject of an investigation that did not result in public disciplinary action, all of that is forever confidential. I could not share that with anybody. If you're publicly disciplined, this is posted on the board's website. It's public record. The law requires me to provide that information to the general public. That doesn't mean you're bad if you've gotten disciplined and still licensed, just mean you had a bad scenario that unfolded in front of you. These folks that I'll talk about here had some really tough scenarios. I bring Dr. Loudon up here, and again, Kevin can jump in anytime if anybody's got questions, but I bring Dr. Loudon up because this is the first dental board case I got as the board's disciplinary attorney. So I'd worked for that law firm for a little over a year. And at that point, they turned the corner and said, we're cutting you loose. Here's your first dental board case. Good luck. This guy's an interesting character. You'll have enormous challenges with him. So I did. So in this particular case, I'll just kind of bring up what the scenario was for him, and I'll let you guys read that. But somewhere between December 2006 and 2007, this particular practitioner was located in the small town of Ulysses, way out southwest corner, kind of near Dodge. And I say near, I mean near Dodge Garden City Way. And this particular practitioner at the time, this case predated the pharmacy board's K-Track system, which is the prescription monitoring program system. So the only way to get information was from the local pharmacies. I couldn't call the pharmacy board. So this particular case, this particular practitioner had been accused of prescribing hydrocodone, a scheduled substance, for a 5-year-old child. That 5-year-old child was the minor child, a woman with whom he was reportedly having an affair. Now, I can tell you right now, this particular practitioner was in fact having an affair with that patient's mother, because that kind of unfolded along the way. Now, in that particular case, the practitioner wrote a prescription naming the child's biological father as a patient. Well, you can imagine the father found out about this and was rightfully hotter than a hornet. And so this individual turned the practitioner in. And so as we got to digging about the prescriptions that practitioner was writing, Dr. Loudon was writing at the time, we found out that he wrote at least 8 controlled substance prescriptions for the woman with whom he was reportedly having an affair. And all those prescriptions were excessive for treatment, and he did not record those in the patient charts. He also was self-prescribing in that he wrote prescriptions for himself, hydrocodone, and then an alcohol withdrawal prescription. So all of that was found out because police officers in that small town of Ulysses went to talk to the practitioner. The only way we could do that at that particular time, again, predates K-Tracks, small town. So the local law enforcement was fantastic. So I called the sheriff down there, and we talked to the sheriff and law enforcement. And when those law enforcement officers, they were deployed, and they talked to the dentist and brought the prescription notes in. And when they arrived at the dentist's office, that dentist was intoxicated or appeared to be intoxicated on each occasion that the law enforcement arrived. So that was in July. Well, they didn't have enough to prosecute this guy because he was doing this in his dental office, and they were working with me at the time trying to figure it out. And so around September 2007 is when we really got a break. And of all places, the break actually came with the lady with whom he was having an affair. So it wasn't himself who got himself in trouble. It was his mistress, because this particular practitioner was not showing up on time for their various dates and rendezvous and the like. So she was calling in welfare checks for this dentist. So that's how we figured all this out. So in September of 2007, the police performed welfare check for that dentist's office, and they found the dentist sitting in a chair with a bottle of vodka, 3/4 empty, and a nose piece, or he was huffing his own nitrous. And so that happened a couple of times. The second time he showed up, he had margaritas in his hand. And then when he was finally being placed in handcuffs and the law enforcement said they had enough, he was knocking down margaritas as the police were hauling him away. So this is what the board did in response. So once the police got involved and we got everything with the police officers there, who I work with quite regularly, almost on a daily basis for a short period of time, the board issued an emergency agency order and made these findings: that he was fraudulent, that he was professionally incompetent, he prescribed in an inappropriate manner, and they felt like he was using intoxicants or drugs in a habitual way. So that emergency order immediately required him to cease the practice of dentistry. Now, that wasn't the end of the story. The story goes on for some time. This particular practitioner, at that time, the investigative committee determined that the practitioner was worth the effort of rehabilitating. And so it was actually a really nice guy, just gotten himself into a twist personally. And so they made great efforts. And I talked to this dentist hundreds of times in an effort to work with this dentist to get that individual rehabilitated where they could get back out in the field. And so we found a situation in Wichita where we got this practitioner in a Wichita dental office, and he was working there for some time. Unfortunately, something happened along the way, and that particular practitioner just fell apart when you put him back in a direct supervision environment. So we actually even had a proctor and a dentist who was supervising them daily, and they were doing hourly checks, and each case was being reviewed, and that this particular dentist could not do anything without the approval of the supervising dentist, and it just unfortunately didn't work out. So the dentist at the time disassembled again, and then wrote a letter surrendering his license. And despite the surrender, made a great deal of efforts to seek reinstatement in both 2013 and 16. And on both of those occasions, the board's investigative committee determined that that particular practitioner, despite great efforts and great monetary resources over the course of several years, in an effort to rehabilitate that dentist, was past the point of rehabilitation and could no longer warrant the public trust because it had been breached on numerous occasions, and he was denied reinstatement. Now, during the denial, I've got a couple of pictures for you here. During the denial, that particular practitioner swore up and down that he had never drunk that vodka or taken the hydrocodone. He carried that with him forever. Now, fascinatingly, here's all of his office. So the town of Ulysses called me years later and said, hey, listen, we were cleaning out the basement in the facility down here, and we found this guy's stuff. What do you want to do with it? We could just throw it away, but we happen to have a big truck rolling to Topeka next week. We can deliver it to you. Well, needless to say, the lawyer in me said, wow, well, I'd love to see what's in those boxes. Please bring them to me. This was kind of like Christmas. I know it's a sad Christmas present, but they brought me these boxes to Topeka, and they brought me all his items. And so we dug through those and inventoried those items. So there's a few pictures. So as I dug through there, I thought, this dentist says he'd never had this vodka and this hydrocodone. And take a look at my picture there on the left. There's his vodka bottle right there. And there's the hydrocodone he was knocking down and self-prescribing and eating. There's his drug kit there, an official fishing tackle box, and you'll see that on the right. So years and years later, I had confirmation of everything we believed to be the case, and in fact was the case, that this particular practitioner was self-medicating, self-prescribing, the like. And that picture, as we all know, is worth 1,000 words. And that's how we knew the investigative committee, despite its greatest efforts, had made the best decision it could under the circumstances. So that was Dr. Loudon. This one's Dr. Turner Williams. For those of you in the Wichita area, you might know, and again, I might remind you, this is all public record. This is not to shame any individual, but this is to see that the board really does have to work on these cases, and the executive director and the attorneys, this is where a vast majority of the board's resources go. So Dr. Turner Williams got on the board's radar because she got a payment from a patient, but she didn't provide dentures for that particular patient. I don't know about you, but in your personal experience, I suspect you've learned, as I have, that if you fail or refuse in any way to get your patient dentures, particularly your elderly patients, if you do not deliver, I promise you they've contacted me. If Sweet Gladys in Rolling Hills Nursing Home in Topeka did not get her dentures from a local dentist, you bet I know about it, because she calls me and we have lovely conversations about her day and the challenges she's having with her dentures. And my job is to try to fix it. And a lot of times I'll call your office and say, look, how can we get Sweet Gladys taken care of here? But this did not happen. And this particular dentist refused to make right with this lady. And doggone it, if that didn't lead to her entire unfolding all over a pair of dentures. It worked well to the public's benefit, did not work well to the dentist's benefit. At that particular time, we started digging around, and KMAP, which is kind of the precursor to the present day format of the Kansas Medicaid program, or the Sunflower Health Program, that assists in some respects, of course, with preventative care. That program complained to the board about controlled substance prescribing habits of this particular practitioner. They said, you know, this looks kind of funny. And a lot of these look like they're for medical conditions and they have nothing to do with dentistry. And so what the board did, this is now post K-TRACS program. Now, as a side note, I had an opportunity to write a lot of the K-TRACS legislation. I wasn't the guy that deserves the pat on the back. I was just the lawyer deployed to help the pharmacy board at the time. So my experiences with Dr. Loudon and several other practitioners led us to start drafting some legislation for the Kansas legislature to contemplate about deploying the K-TRACS program. So we used the experience of the pharmacy board, both as the attorneys and my personal experience with the dental board. And then the pharmacy board really, and the pharmacy association did the heavy lifting, but we put the K-TRACS program in place. They did the heavy crane work. I did some of the structural and some of the procedural issues. And we got the K-TRACS program deployed between basically the KMAP program complaining about Turner Williams and this disciplinary petition. Now, this is an interesting tact we took, and we did this on purpose. So in July of 2012, we filed a petition for discipline, and we got an administrative law judge, a neutral arbiter, a third-party judge, to give us an order against this dentist not to prescribe any controlled substances. This wasn't an accident. We did this on purpose. We planned this. So just to forewarn you, or kind of a little tidbit or a tip along the way, if we've asked for some information, there's a reason. We're not asking for it accidentally. And I don't mean that to scare you, but the reality is we ask for only what we want because we want to see how far we can take the practitioner. In this case, we believed, based on many conversations with that particular practitioner, or I did, that the practitioner would continue to prescribe substances despite the judge's order. So we got a judge to say, hey, look, this practitioner, Dr. Turner Williams, can no longer prescribe controlled substances. So that was in July of 2002. Well, I gave that practitioner a couple of months to figure out how long she would go, because I had a pretty good feeling she was going to keep prescribing. But this time I had the pharmacy board's report at my fingertips. So I just call the pharmacy board, my old director friend over there, and say, hey, bring me up the K-TRACS report of this particular individual. And here's what the report does. And you can see all the prescriptions in that short period of time, 89 separate prescriptions for over 1,392 tablets, all controlled. And you can see all the different types of controlled, some hydrocodone, a lot of Schedule II substances, of course. So we knew she was going to do that, and doggone it if we didn't get the proof that she would do it. So after we had valid proof in a pharmacy report, we issued an emergency order and suspended that particular dentist license without a hearing. And we can do that for 90 days. So we were able to do that because she was a threat to the public health, safety, and welfare. We issued that order. And then within that 90-day time span, the board had a full hearing. So there are a couple of board members that were previously on the board at the time that may be on this call. They were actually the jury, essentially, in this case. And they issued a final agency order that revoked this dentist's license to practice dentistry because she was a threat, as I mentioned. I put the quotation at the back. I actually went back and dug up the trial transcript, which is about 15 feet thick because this went on forever. And I say that, of course, loosely, but a very large trial transcript. And this dentist summarized her career like that. After her license was revoked, the dentist said in an open room on an open mic with a court reporter and the whole bit, said, you know, the sad thing is I never got paid for all those drugs. I got paid for some of them, but not for all of them. That, in my opinion, was a really sad way to summarize her dental career. But that's what we encountered with that particular practitioner. This practitioner, this is a different story. This was a sad one because this is a young dentist. And I suspect there are a couple of dentists on the line right now that may have gone to dental school with this particular practitioner. This was a really sad deal. This is the case of what I call the case of golden handcuffs. I see young dentists come out, and I suspect you will all experience it, or most of you experienced it. Hopefully not the practitioners that have been out in the field for quite some time. But the young dentists have what I call a case of golden handcuffs. If you succumb to the case of golden handcuffs, I will promise I will see you. And what I mean by that is you've been so broke for so long, understandably, and you've borrowed truckloads of money from dental school for your student loans, and you have hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt. And you don't have to explain that to me because I understand. I played the game too. I put mine behind me as fast as I possibly could and never look back. I know that's not as easy in dentistry. Having said that, this particular dentist came out of dental school with truckloads of debt like most dentists do. And as opposed to making personal decisions to retire that debt or grapple that debt, they bought cars, bought houses, bought purses and clothes and you name it. So they became a victim of what I call the golden handcuffs. They lived a life that they probably should have waited to live at age 45 and tried to live that life at age 28 or 29 after dental school. They wanted to be like the dentist who'd been out for 20 or 25 years. And while I hope that to be the case with all the young dentists out there, the reality is that many decisions that I see are made based on financial disasters because you can't put some of that debt behind you. And in this particular case, that's what this dentist did. And so we encountered a criminal investigation of this dentist because she started selling drugs, found it was way more profitable to sell on the black market than when it was to perform dentistry. So this particular dentist started distributing these, and none of it was dentally related. It was all recreational. She would keep half of the prescription for her own use. So she was chewing and swallowing the pills, and then she would sell the other half. Well, we got the DEA involved. And so the undercover DEA agents performed a drug scene, and they were actually buyers, and they bought drugs unlawfully and illegally from this dentist. We caught her red-handed right in the act. She surrendered her DEA license. Well, this is where she made some enormous mistakes. Not that a mistake was bad enough that she was selling drugs to undercover DEA agents, but she hauled off. We knew she was there and we wanted to see what she would do. So this kind of hails back to what I was saying earlier. Be very, very careful when you're marching forward in these cases. That's why I encourage lawyers, because you want to make sure you bump into a situation where you think, wait a second, is the board posturing itself to see what I'm going to do here? Well, this dentist renewed her license and she lied on a renewal form. And she failed to disclose her DEA certificate surrender. She failed to disclose that she had pending criminal charges. And she actually had filed a plea in Johnson County that she was going to plead out to some of these. So she had already signed the agreement and they were waiting for a formal hearing date in front of the district court judge there. And she renewed her license 2 days before her plea hearing, where she was going to plea out. So the Johnson County DA, of course, notified us and said, hey, look, I've got a deal. Notified me, called me and said, hey, Lane, I got a deal here. And I laughed and I said, you know, the sad thing is she renewed her license a couple of days ago and she lied on the license renewal form. So for any of you out there who have questions about whether or not you should tell the board about whatever it is you've encountered, whether it's a DUI or whether it's a misdemeanor theft, believe it or not, I get dentists who think it's funny to rob from Target and steal money from Target. It's crazy. I don't understand it, but they do. And so I get all these different kinds of situations come unfolding. You are obligated to tell us. And if you don't tell us, unfortunately, the scenario will unfold worse. The board sometimes can take action before your hearing is done. A lot of times the board will wait because sometimes your plea will be different than what the court of public opinion or what the charges matter or what the charges actually are unfolded by the district attorney, because the district attorney will cut deals. So sometimes we'll wait, sometimes we'll hit them early, but that's what happened in this case. She lied, she was distributing drugs unlawfully, and the board determined that there was no way to rehabilitate this particular dentist. Now it's not just dentists that get in trouble. This one, I bring this young lady up because she was a unique success. And I say this to say that even hygienists have trouble. It's not just the dentists that have trouble, even hygienists get in trouble. So in this particular case, a young hygienist had gotten herself into a bad situation and she'd been arrested a couple of times in a couple of different counties. There were many charges against her, but as I just previously mentioned, oftentimes we've got to work with law enforcement to see what happens in the plea scenario, because everybody wants a plea. If you don't plea, you're going to jail for a long time. So this young hygienist pled out to a couple of different charges that didn't match all the public convictions. You know, you get thrown up in the newspaper, up on the local news, and you're convicted by the court of public opinion before you get out of the gate. So we like to give the judicial system its righteous due and allow it to unfold. And sometimes, as I say, that happens, sometimes it doesn't. But this young hygienist sorted herself out. And so she got placed on probation with the court. At that time, she let her license lapse because she was having some financial challenges, but she completed her court probation extremely well. She was discharged early. She got her life put back together. Her family came around her, glued her back together. She glued herself back together, and she worked diligently with the investigative committee on creating a license reintegration program. And she's actually working now. And by all accounts, we've heard great things. I hope I never see her name again, other than on the renewal pages, because she's done a great job, and I hope that continues to be that way. Now, having said that, this is a local guy. And when I say local, I say a Topeka guy. I think some of the Topeka dentists know this individual. Some of you may not. I bring this one up because this is a long kind of drawn out procedure. So I'm going to put a lot on the screen there and kind of let you read that. But this particular dentist had trouble with the board long before I got out of school. I won't tell you which school. I might date myself, but long before I got out of a school back in the early 90s, this dentist got in trouble a couple of times and entered into a couple of negotiated settlement agreements with the board back in the early 90s. Well, this dentist went off the map, and then in about 2018, the dentist resurfaced and got back up on the board's radar. And this particular dentist got a number of complaints about the cleanliness of his office. And so that was one issue. And so of course that relates to your sanitation inspections and everything you might encounter. But then we started getting complaints with other local dentists about substandard work. So say, patient Johnny Jones went in and had some work done, starts saying, man, that doesn't feel right in my mouth, and goes down the street to a different dentist. And that dentist looks in the mouth and says, hey, this thing looks kind of bombed out. This is a mess. And so they filed complaints to the board. And so the board's investigative committee, its inspector, who's a dentist, me and several others work with this particular dentist on a rehabilitation plan. And that plan is several pronged. It's about getting his office renovated and back up to what people might perceive the 21st century dentistry, new radiograph machine, new record keeping, a new office assistant, some continuing education courses. And at the outset, this guy works pretty hard on it. And initially all seems to be going well. We make various checks along the way, we go in, but somewhere along the way in the path, the whole situation starts to deteriorate. So as I mentioned, the inspector, we had two different board presidents, and I make office visits. And so we go down to see this guy in action and see what we're finding. So as this situation starts deteriorating, so here's some of the findings the inspector makes. So this is a true dentist to dentist review. That's why we have an inspector do this. You'll see some of the findings there. We couldn't find a spore test log. We didn't have protocols for the light curing devices and x-rays. This one was staggering to me and troubling to me on a number of different levels, just even as a lay person walking in. There was no sharps container. So all glass vials, needles, and blunt objects and everything else just going in the normal waste basket and then being thrown out in the Shawnee County trash. Very dangerous for the trash handlers, very dangerous for the public. And the general office had deteriorated. Now, if that wasn't enough, we decided, you know what, I don't see these things as mutually exclusive, my 5 Ds of discipline. So we decided, I bet you there's a prescribing problem here too. So let's just ask the pharmacy board and take a look. And sure enough, true to our suspicions, the pharmacy board says, hey, look, this guy's written, 3,600 plus prescriptions for narcotics. Now we went through those line by line, or the investigator did, and did a diligent job here in reviewing each one of those prescriptions. And several of them were determined to be appropriate for the treatment provided. So many of those prescriptions were appropriate, but there were also a number of findings that many patients received multiple prescriptions for opioids, those scheduled substances, some for the same patient, some for the patient's family, and they were all written within a 10 to 14 day time span. And the reality was we found that while there were many that were appropriate, there were staggering amounts that were inappropriate prescriptions for the treatment that was provided. So along the way, we did some inspections. So needless to say, the board determined, the investigative committee determined that it was necessary to intervene. So here's some pictures I took along the way. So you'll find that some of these pictures don't look out of the ordinary. So my picture on the left, that's just your office area. Of course, in the middle, this you're just basic operatory, nothing overly fancy, but functional. New x-ray machine there with all the tags that we required him to acquire. Over here on the right was some of the general uncleanliness. So that louvered door there was the public bathroom right behind that little door. It was not clean. And then you'll see just some random file cabinets, a broken printer, and some things like that. So we started getting complaints from the public about that. Said, hey, just kind of this looks messy. So I trust and know that each of you is running an office that operates on a much better scale. But the reality is sometimes the public's perception of what's occurring in there is more important than perhaps what you think is occurring. So if the public says that place is dirty, well, that's a condemnation of the public's view of your office. That's not to say we're going to find that, but if you start getting complaints like that, the reality is somebody's not finding something right. So here's what we started digging. So that left picture there, you see that purple towel, that was a spit towel. That towel was being used for spittle and overflow, or the backwash and the water rinse coming out for patients. Well, needless to say, that wasn't being used on a patient by patient basis. That was it. Needless to say, that was found to be quite dangerous. The middle picture there was befuddling for a number of different reasons, but you'll see that red liner in that trash can. That's your sharps container. As you can see, it's no lid. It's not puncture resistant. And just everything was going in that. Picture on the right was your dry clave there, surrounded by his cracker snack and some molds and some pepper and some others. So I'll just show you a few pictures there along the way. You'll see a lot of cleaning solutions and agents, many of those purchased at the local grocery store around the corner, carburetor, fluids, you name it. General cleanliness was not there. Let's see some closer up. My top right corner, you'll see that was a basic trash can. It was filthy. There were some sharps objects found in there, needles and the like. And you'll see food items, bread, the bread knife. I think there was some salt, table salt, and maybe some jelly and some other things there, and some cinnamon along the way. These are broken pieces of equipment. You see this particular dentist liked crackers, so there were crackers everywhere. The crackers were in both the clean areas and what he perceived to be clean, and the areas that were deemed to be unsanitary. So needless to say, there was concerns about asepsis and a lot of other matters. There's his rinse sink and the like. So a lot of things out of the ordinary there in that particular office. Now, as the investigation unfolded, and I went back and I found this picture today because I wanted to make sure I was looking at the right thing. This particular picture, we were investigating a patient who had had a tooth extracted. Now, this particular dentist was what I called a 50-buck pluck dentist. You would walk in, any patient would walk in and say, I need some work done. This guy just did exodontia. And he would say, how much money do you have in your pocket? If somebody said 20 bucks, he'd say, I'll do it for 20 bucks. If somebody said 50 bucks, he'd say, I'll take your 50 bucks. But he would pull teeth. And for the longest time, the tooth extractions were of no concern, apparently. Flew under the radar for quite some time. But then the tooth extractions, the work started getting bad. So in one of the cases, we asked him for any evidence of this particular tooth extraction, and doggone it, if that dentist didn't mail me the tooth. So you'll see here, he even stamped it. He threw it in what you see there. There's your envelope there for your sanitation, your dry clave, or your autoclave. He just threw it in that envelope. He sent me the tooth. It's covered in spit and blood, and he mails it through the United States Postal Service. So we just opened this one day, and that napkin underneath that's a Clorox wipe that we threw down because I opened it up and this thing fell on my desk. So needless to say, it was a great deal of, it was a troubling feature that occurred there. The board didn't shine too kindly on that particular situation. So here's what happened in the case, and I'll bring up a bunch of it all at once so you can take it all in to see that this case had a long and arduous administrative and judicial history. Despite great efforts, the dentist made a lot of attempts, but he was either unable or unwilling to resolve his deficiencies. And around the same time that the investigative committee really started coming down on him and saying, this is the end of the show, another local dentist here in Topeka filed yet another complaint about substandard work, where in that particular case, there was, I think it was a through and through fistula, and there were a great deal of iatrogenic grooves on the lingual plate where he just burred this guy to pieces. And so tore the mouth of this particular patient up, and he went to another dentist because he had a great deal of pain. And that dentist said, oh, holy cow, where did this occur? And so that was a mess all the way around. So needless to say, the board issued one emergency order and said no exodontia. The dentist proceeded to ignore us. So that was December. In March of 2021, the board issued another order and said no exodontia. The dentist proceeded to ignore the board again. The board then had a formal hearing, and that's the hearing I alluded to. It was a 12-hour hearing with judges, a full board sitting in bank, which means in full. The board at that time determined that this particular practitioner was a continual and constant threat to the public health, safety, and welfare, and they revoked his license. The dentist ignored that order. The board issued another emergency order to revoke his license. The dentist yet again ignored that. The board issued yet another order in June of 2021 and revoked it again. These are all procedural stacking mechanisms. This happens on purpose. The board's creating a trail through the administrative procedure process. The dentist ignored again and kept right on practicing. The dentist then filed a petition for what we call judicial review, meaning he asked the local county district court to look at it. In the meantime, we came down on him some more. He withdrew his request and all legal remedies expired. Now, I say all that to say, holy cow, the board went to a lot of effort. Did the guy stop? Well, this is what the dentist said during a hearing. So the dentist said during his hearing, he was questioned several times by lawyers along the way. The dentist was asked, if somebody came in and said, hey, I just want drugs and narcotics, can you tell him no? The dentist said, I can't tell that guy no. I'm just going to give him more narcotics. Then the dentist was asked, if a patient walks in for treatment, even if you don't have a licensed practice dentistry, can you tell that person no? He said he couldn't do that. And then he also admitted that he willfully and repeatedly violated all the board's orders and that he didn't have a great deal of respect for the board and he felt like the board didn't care about him and the whole bit. So the board made all these findings. These are all statutory findings that the board made, that he was a constant and continual threat to the public health, safety, and welfare, from professional competence to gross wanton willful negligence, all the way down to adequate records and prescribing outside the scope of dentistry. Now, we think we've got this thing under control, fortunately. But this is this picture that I show you here. This is a picture of the little office at 29th in California here in Topeka. It's on the east side of town. You can look through there and hopefully you can get a good zoom in. This is us doing some surveillance. This is me and some other staff members doing surveillance. You can see in that mirror in that picture, that dentist was still in that office performing dentistry despite all the board orders and the like. Now, fortunately, we think we've got it under control and the dentist is no longer practicing. If, however, anybody in and around the surrounding area discover or hear that this particular practitioner is still out there, please let me know. This is not somebody to provide referrals to or anybody else. I think the dentist at one point had a robust career, unfortunately just fell off the rails and was no longer able to process the practice of dentistry anymore. So that's a really kind of a summary of what we do and the legal process as applied. So I could sit here all night and tell you about statutes and, oh, if you did this, but the reality is we think those examples, while they seem harsh, are pertinent to your profession because that's how the board, going back to my original comments, self-regulates. The board determines if individuals can be rehabilitated or require retribution. Those are the only two routes. The board through its investigative committee, in my experience, has tried really hard not to put people out of business, but by the same token, send the message that the individual has to get better. So we can order continuing education. We order, go back and take a regional clinical exam. We've ordered people into programs to go get 50 hours of education. We've sent people to Louisiana State University. We've sent them to the University of Oregon. We found them training courses all across the land to try to make practitioners better. So continuing education has been one route where we've tried to fix those individuals who may not rise to the level of license revocation, but have kind of fallen off the rails. Now, I would imagine on this third section here, principles of ethics and code of professional conduct, that many of your ethics continuing education courses center on these principles from the American Dental Association. Patient autonomy, non-malfeasance, beneficence, justice, and veracity. And you see all those meanings there, or all those phrasings or phraseology there from each one of those. Well, the reality is, as I've mentioned a couple of times, all those have been codified in the law. Even though the Dental Association has provided that, the Kansas legislature has seen fit to codify most of this. So let me show you, just kind of more briefly, let me show you how all this unfolds. So for example, in patient autonomy, this is where I get a lot of complaints. And I know you're busy and I know your offices are robust and you got patients coming and going, your hygiene department's popping, your front desk is trying to make collections, you're a cash forward business, you're trying to keep the lights on every day and also take some home so you can have a nice profit and your family can have a good standard of living and your staff can have the same. So I know the objective is the same in every office. It's both admirable and the correct target. Now, having said that, in the hustle and bustle of your offices, I get a lot of complaints about patient involvement. So you'll see that code 1A. I just picked a few codes out of the American Dental Association's Code of Professional Conduct, so we can just talk about those briefly. I get a lot of complaints because a lot of times patients call and say, you know, the dentist is in there and they got this whole treatment plan, but it was either changed without my consent or I don't understand what's happening. And for the most part, I don't disbelieve that the treatment plans are being written down and provided to the patients. A lot of times in the speed of flipping patients, however many patients you have coming through your office a day, one or more patients don't understand in your language what's supposed to transpire. So they'll call me or my office and say, I don't know what's happening in my dental office. I think something's been changed on me, and it will promote a complaint. I'm not saying you need to slow down, and I'm not telling you how to run your office, but a lot of complaints in my experience could probably be solved on the front end if your administrative staff, your hygiene department, or even you can slow down and translate. Even I say in investigative committee meetings, and I've been doing this a long time, and I've represented some very wealthy medical doctors and everybody else, I have to say, time out. I can fly legal mumbo jumbo at you all day long, but I need you to explain this to me like I'm a third grader. Please explain this to me. What's happening in my mouth? And so that's where a lot of the challenges that I see unfold with patient complaints, because they just simply don't have any idea, and rightfully don't have any idea. If you come in and tell them, hey, we're going to look at tooth number, J for your kid, they don't have any idea what you're talking about. You need to point that out, slow it down for them. Or, hey, tooth number 4 on you is bombed out. We're going to fix it. We're going to do all these things. They don't have a clue. And I know you all know that, but it's helpful to have that constant reminder, both from the Dental Association, but also from the board that gets complaints about you. Here's another complaint that I get a lot along those same lines, patient records. So that's ADA code 1B. Well, that's been codified in Kansas law too. So there's a statute and there's a regulation that has dental record keeping requirements. If you don't know what needs to go into your dental record keeping requirements, please look at that paragraph, that KAR 71-1-15. If you have any problems finding it, I can help you find it. I can point it out. But those are your record keeping requirements at a minimum. You'll also need to produce those records for patients on request. So if a patient is already unhappy for whatever reason, and I'm not saying you're the reason, but if they've already decided they're leaving your office and going down the street to one of your colleagues who's also a competitor, admittedly, they're your colleague, but they're a competitor because you need the business too. Many patients complain because they can't get the records from you, and you hold them. And then they get mad because you try to charge them. Now, in all fairness, you're allowed to charge for those records, but I get a lot of complaints because patients say, I'm already leaving that office and I'm bent because that doctor wants to charge me $50. And they're looking to twist a knife on you and file a complaint. So you do what you want to do. My experience has been perhaps maybe just to get rid of a difficult patient, to get the records down the road. Don't charge that person and leave them with an already bad taste in their mouth. Don't make it worse. Please make sure you keep adequate records. That's one of the grounds for disciplinary action. So that's a couple of my experiences in patient autonomy. Now let's go briefly to malfeasance or please do no harm. You have, of course, as you well know, nobody wants to get anybody hurt. I know that. You wake up every day and decide, nobody goes out to hurt anybody. I got that. But the Code of Professional Conduct says you have to keep your knowledge and skill current. Fascinatingly, just like we're doing tonight, you're getting 2 hours in ethics for this course. Well, you are obligated to acquire those ethics, and that's been codified. You have to get those ethics courses. So I applaud each of you that have decided to do that tonight. So there's both a law and a code of professional conduct about doing that. So I'm just touching on each one of these briefly. Also, do no harm, of course, code 2D says you can't practice while you're impaired. We've talked about several of those individuals who were impaired in some way or handing out impairment to other individuals. So I won't spend much time there. A third code, do good, beneficence, do good, Latin phrase. So as we all know, this is community service. So serve your community. So we've seen that. The KDA does a bang up job. You guys all know that. Many of you, and in fact, perhaps all of you have participated in KMOM. Now I've seen this on the ground a couple of times. I've been to Kansas City. I've been to Topeka. I have been to Wichita to see KMOM unfold. I have never seen an operation more efficient, even if you feel like it's inefficient. You have done yeoman's work treating these individuals who might not otherwise have access to care in some way or don't get the care that they need for whether it's personal choice or whether it's some unintended consequence or whatever their situation is. KMOM is a great outlet. I encourage you to keep doing that. Your staff here, Anita here in the KDA office and Kevin and others with the donated dental services, you do a bang up job there. And I've sent people your direction all the time. I know some of you were COVID vaccinators, so that community service is valuable. This is a side note, another question I get here that's kind of along the same lines of doing good. I got this call actually about 2 weeks ago from a dentist who had a young patient show up in the chair that had bruises that might not otherwise be attributable to a kid who's just playing out on the playground or riding bikes and bumping their knees. And so there were some questions about bruising across this child's body, face, back, and arms that were readily visible in the dental office. And the dentist called quite distraught and said, look, those don't look like a kid playing on the playground. And their heart, the dentist's heart was heartbroken and was trying to figure out what the right thing to do was. So we were able to point that dentist to a law that you are obligated to report any suspicion to your local authorities or to the Department of Children and Families, if that is the appropriate outlet. Now, the upshot for you in this particular case is, even though you're required to report because you're a dentist, you're a medical provider, a provider of healthcare services, if you report in good faith, that is to say, look, I did the best I could. This didn't look like a kid who got bumped up on a playground. This looks like some adult wailing on a kid or self-inflicting injury on this poor child. You have no immunity for civil liability. That is to say, nobody can sue you if you make that report in good faith. Now, if you haul off and do it on your own and say, I'm getting back at an ex-spouse or somebody that's causing you a problem, that's not good faith. But if your heart is in the right place and all you do is make a report, you have no civil liability for that report. So that dentist took that route. I worked with that dentist to help that dentist make the report. It was a good report. Now, what happens is beyond us. All you can do is make the report to authority. So I think that's a valuable piece. Another code of ethics there, justice or fairness, and I'll bring a lot of those up along the way. You obviously have an obligation to treat people fairly. Now, this one's interesting to me. This first one, code 4A under the ADA code for patient selection. Now, I always like to tell people you can exercise discretion in selecting patients. You don't have to take everybody that walks through your door. I use this is my statement because lawyers are the same, and there's actually case law on it, that lawyers are not public utilities and dentists are not public utilities. You don't have to provide services to everybody. Now, having said that, just like we all know, we've been taught in kindergarten, you can't deny anybody on the basis of their race, creed, orientation, or anything else. Now, I should note, just because it's here, COVID-19 vaccination status of patients is untested waters. I got a call from a dentist that said, listen, can I reject a patient because they don't have a vaccine on file or they won't provide me the vaccine information? And the reality is that has not been sorted out in the law, whether you can do that. Now, I did tell the dentist, as kind of a personal anecdote, I said, listen, I'm not trying to tell you what to do. There's no legal, that has not unfolded in the federal or state courts yet. It's there. It's just not been finished. Now, of course, the lawyer in me wants this to be solved because I don't have an answer to it. Having said that, you are a healthcare provider. You already deal in communicable diseases. I have a strong suspicion based on case law and how everything else unfolds that if you denied somebody on the basis of a lack of a COVID-19 vaccine, it probably would not turn out well for you. Not because that would make you a malefactor or a bad actor or anything else, but because you already deal with communicable diseases. This is who you are. This is what you do on a daily basis, from spittle to STIs to bloodborne pathogens and everything else. I doubt it would go over well. So you might want to think about that. You already do this. This is who you are. Emergency codes, I get complaints about you guys not having coverage over the weekend. Please find some coverage. And then everybody, I say everybody, the fee splitting code there, you can't split fees. There's a prohibition both in the ADA code and also in Kansas law, but you can't split that without the knowledge of the patient's legal representative. If you have some questions about that, feel free to call or email me. I won't talk about this other particular dentist in any great detail, but you have an obligation to communicate with the board truthfully on every occasion, whether you have something pending. Usually the general recommendation is you head off any board findings and you tell the board, even if you say, hey, listen, I've gotten myself into a little bit of trouble, I need to self-report, and then we'll start working with you from there. But you need to fill out your application for renewal applications, everything else. Of course, Dr. Simone, earlier we talked about her. She lied on her renewal applications 2 days before she pled guilty to self-medicating and prescribing it unlawfully. This dentist kind of did the same thing out of Missouri. So if you are not truthful with the board, you can be disciplined for that. Other codes there, please just make sure, I know this is being recorded so you can slow down and read some of those. I've highlighted those codes. please make sure your fees are being charged appropriately and not in a false or misleading manner. I see people change treatment dates. You'd be surprised. They'll trip over a treatment date for a different date into a future year. Typically happens around December 30, 31, and they'll throw that into the new calendar year to try to change the treatment date there so the patient has access to more insurance. That's inappropriate. You can't do that. I've got dentists that have been in trouble for that. You cannot submit a misleading claim form. The other one I see, unfortunately, a little more often than not is upcoding or unbundling, where you start unbundling services that might fit under one ADA CDK code, and you split those in half so you can code separately or extract more money from the insurance company, or upcoding. And the generalized example on that upcoding is calling a pro fee, a deep scaling and root planing, getting the money for that. It's unfortunate it happens. Please don't do those things. That's both codified in Kansas law and the Code of Professional Conduct. Now, pandemic presumption briefly, and I know we're kind of coming down the stretch, but this is where I come down the stretch with you. We all had pandemic presumptions that this was going to be 2 weeks. I don't believe this video is going to play on your end, but for those of you, I at some point during the pandemic, I had this moment of Tom Hanks in that movie, The Money Pit, that 1980s movie, with the actress, I think her name's Shelley Duvall. And so a couple of these couple buys a house, and it turns into a money pit, and they keep having encounters where they talk to the contractors and they say, how long is it gonna take to put this place together? And every answer and every refrain is 2 weeks, 2 weeks, 2 weeks. Well, I think that's how we all felt. I don't say this in a denigrating manner, but it's kind of more of a tongue in cheek, if I can use dental lingo there. So if you have 30 seconds and you want to YouTube that, go watch that 30-second clip about 2 weeks, because I think that's how we all felt. Now, I'm going to bring all these board myths up. I had several myths along the way, and I will say that if any of you called me during the peak of the pandemic, say late March 2020 to even today, and I haven't gotten back to you, I apologize in advance. My phone had not rang so heavily, and I'm sure Kevin's was the same way, and in all fairness, yours as well. We were all wandering around uncharted waters, but with every decision that was made, the board was not making any of those decisions. Those decisions were coming through the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, which is a cabinet level secretarial position that immediately answers to the governor's office, which is on the second floor of the Kansas State House. So the governor's office would issue an order, whether you agreed with it or didn't agree with it. That's just the way it went. The gubernatorial orders through executive powers were coming down. Those would funnel through the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, and those would be fed to me. So anytime you got an email, and I know we had several start and stop orders there along the way, the board didn't have any of those decisions. The power does not exist, and it was never contemplated for the board to make any of these decisions. So you can see that the board did not have the power to close dental offices statewide. That came through the governor's office on down through KDHE. The same, we got calls about offices saying, issue an order that says you got to pay all licensed and non-licensed staff. I don't have that power. The board doesn't have that power. I got calls about requiring all dental offices to reopen on a certain date and time, that everybody restarts on, say, April 19th. Well, the board didn't have that power. Then, of course, I know masking is a conflicting issue here. The board did not have the power to require masking of patients when entering or waiting within a dental office. Didn't have the power then, does not have the power now. We have been recommending that you deploy those toolkits, and the local health officers are your resources there, but the board had no power. The board did not have the power to let any of the hygienists act as temporary vaccinators. That also had to come from the governor's office. And we could not order all licensed and non-licensed staff to obtain the COVID-19 vaccine. Those are some of the common myths, and I say that loosely. I know everybody reached for the board, and rightfully reached for the board. And as a corollary to that, for me to answer some of those, I'm sorry if all those answers did not come out the way you wanted, but I know we all played a scenario here that nobody had contemplated, and I think we all just tried to do the best we could. So there are some of the board myths I encountered. There might be several others. If you have questions about those, please feel free to email those, but those were the common ones, and I got these hundreds and hundreds of times. But I'm thankful that we were getting through that. Now, speaking of getting through, even though we're on Zoom, as you well know, you're turning the corner. I think it had been advised that everybody deploy the toolkit that the ADA put together, and the governor's office did contact me, and then we ran that through the board, and the board vetted that ADA toolkit, and the KDA vetted that, and your teams vetted those. And it was determined to tell the Department of Health and Environment and the governor's office that those were the appropriate kits to get dental offices back up and running. So Kevin really did a lot of heavy lifting there, and so did your board members, and I know your board of delegates and everybody else. So the good news for you is, because you're already healthcare agencies and you're already dealing a lot of that, a lot of these issues were already solved, and you guys were, some of you made minor tweaks, some of you made heavier tweaks, but you made those tweaks to get back up and running. So I'm grateful for that, that opportunity. And so we've turned the corner here. And lastly, this is just a personal anecdote as we seek to close. Oh, this was kind of pre-COVID, but this is something I say to my children. It's kind of one of my life mottos here as we wrap up. I always like to say, to it, through it, and on with it. And that's how I felt during COVID. That's what I tell my children all the time, to the point where they can't stand me when I say that. But they say, to it, through it, and on with it. And this is just, I did this because the dentist that asked me to do the CE last time was an avid hiker, as am I. So I use this saying in my life, and I hope that was deployed during COVID. But if any of you have had a chance to hike, and this is just more of a personal anecdote, if any of you have had a chance to hike in Colorado Springs and you're up for an extreme hiking trail, I encourage you to go to the Manitou Incline, which is in Colorado Springs. It shares a trailhead with Pikes Peak, or the Pikes Peak Railroad. It's an incredibly extreme hiking trail. While it's 1 mile in length, you'll see my descriptors there. It was originally built as a cable car. It's incredibly steep. The lowest grades are somewhere in the 45% grade, and then it gets steep up to 68% grade. It's incredibly difficult, and you're climbing across railroad ties, 2,744 inclined steps of those railroad ties. If you get injured there, it can take first responders 3 to 4 hours to reach injured hikers. So you're on your own for the most part. That last note I put down there, because this is where it all ties into COVID and kind of my thoughts over the last couple of years. This trail is not ADA accessible. And by that, I don't mean American Dental Association accessible. I mean Americans with Disabilities Act. And let me show you why. Here's a brief picture. This is a picture I took on the left of the trailhead, and it tells you all these things. Look, if you do this, you're going to climb the Washington Monument 3 times today, Statue of Liberty 6 times, Eiffel Tower twice, and the Empire State Building once. If you do all these, it's the equivalent of. And my picture on the right there's the hiking trail from a distance at the base of the trailhead after I parked. My wife and 2 kids who are much younger than we all conquered this. We like to do these kind of things and conquer it. You'll see the top is the apex there, but the bottom, I'll highlight, you can't see that. And it didn't dawn on me at the time, but right there in that foreground, there's a wheelchair there. That didn't dawn on me when I took that picture, but there's a wheelchair there, and it never crossed my mind until I got up the trail a ways. But let me show you why. So on the left here, so not just because I'm the director of the board, but like you, I'm a family guy, and love your kids, and you do the best by them, and try to love your family and raise your kids right in your eyes. But you see on the left there, that's my family and I at the top. This is after we conquered it. Now my boy there, he's a much bigger, stronger kid. My daughter there is a much stronger young lady now. But we took this, but that's the picture at the top of us conquering this trail. And we did this on a hot Colorado afternoon. In the middle of that trail, or the pictures, you'll see me with the water. That entire backpack's full of water. There's no water. Of course, there's no water fountains or anything. My daughter kind of leading the way, as she always does, and my son kind of close beside me there. And my wife took that picture, but you'll see the railroad ties climbing up, and that peak goes on and on and on. And there's one bailout point, and if you don't take it, you're jammed, and you own that trail the rest of the way. But I use the saying, to it, through it, and on with it, because you'll see on the right there, this is a staff sergeant. This is Staff Sergeant Travis Strong here. Travis Strong, I asked permission to take that picture because I met him about 3/4 the way up. This staff sergeant lost his legs in a Humvee attack overseas, and he had no legs, and he was climbing this on his hands, and he was slinging his entire body up with his arms, and he was taking one railroad tie ahead. And when I met him, he was out of water. And so that backpack full of water I had, we offloaded as much water as we could for him. He drank that water, and we asked for permission. He said, yes, please document it. And we took a video for him so he could put it on his Facebook feed for him at the top. So we're standing at the top shooting down as he comes across the finish line. But the reality is, no matter what your situation is like, whether you're facing a board investigation or COVID or a shutdown that you never anticipated or what have you, I hope for whatever scenario you find yourself in, you use the spirit of this one of many strong veterans here who deserve and demand our respect. But I hope you also deploy what my theory is in life, no matter the scenario, the struggle or the strife or the tragedy that you could turn into a triumph. I hope you get to it, through it, and on with it, just like this young staff sergeant did, and just like we had the pleasure of encountering along the way. So with that, that kind of summarizes my experience and my global view of COVID, kind of looking backwards over the lens in the last year, year and a half. There's your summary. And of course, any questions, which we didn't have at the moment, but I hope that gives you something to work with. I'm happy to answer any questions now, or if you have emails, and I'll, at this point, kind of flip it to Kevin and see as we wrap up right at that 2-hour mark.
Yeah, we had a couple questions. Amy, I went ahead and sent you a response back. Go ahead and email me at kevin@ksdental.org, and I'll be sure to get you that answer. There was one quick question I think you can answer, and that was, what's a license duty to report a suspected practice violation?
Well, that's a great question. So some of that would be factually sensitive. And I guess, is there any indication, is this a practice down the street, or is it your own practice? Either way would kind of be the same. If, for example, like my example of Mr. Putnam there were other dentists that were encountering substandard work. Well, you're obliged to report that, even if nothing comes of it. The reality is, if you report that substandard work where you believe the patient has been harmed and could continue to be harmed irreparably, or has been harmed in some manner that breaches any standard of care that you would see or expect to see. Now, I'm not talking about you guys disagree about whether there's a cavity on tooth number 4. I'm talking about post-work, you look in and go, man, that mouth is full of cement. This is a disaster. You're obliged to report that. And then you can blame the board. In all fairness, you can blame the board and say, well, the board didn't do anything. All I can do is respond. In the same vein, or on the same hand, if you have a practice problem in your office, whatever it is, and I think we've had everything, and I don't say this lightly, we've had everything from dogs to death in a dental office. And that is to say, a patient complains and says, that person has a dog and that dog licked me. Well, some patients don't like your dog. They don't like Puffy Fluffy. You love your dog. I love my dog, but your patients don't love your dog. So do yourself a favor. Maybe you don't need your dog as a mascot in your office. On the other hand, of course, we've seen the very difficult situations of death in the dental office. Of course, you're obligated to self-report those if the media doesn't beat you to it. In the middle of those,
Hey, Lane, while you're answering that, are the dentists mandatory reporters like for child abuse, or is it just sort of discretionary? I mean, like I said, you're saying, if you see something that looks like it's significant, or the health and welfare of the patient, you need to report it. But otherwise, if it's just bad dentistry, what's, or in your opinion, bad dentistry, what's the obligation?
Yeah, great question. So yeah, you are a mandatory reporter for suspected child abuse. I say you're obliged to report. There is no statute that requires you to report if you encounter another patient that has had what you believe to be substandard work. Now, having said that, that cuts to that gap between the statute and the ethical standards that you need to deploy. You have to make a determination at that point, because you're not a mandatory reporter against your colleague if you don't believe that person is in threat, right? If you believe the person is threat, you need to tell us. But if you say, gosh, this is a close call, I probably should report it, but I don't quite know, you're not a mandatory reporter in that regard. So you have to exercise your discretion to determine, and this is where the self-regulatory piece of the board and the profession comes in. You have to determine if it's in your interest and the best interest of that, particularly the patient, to have that report. I can't always guarantee anonymity in reporting. We try our best, but sometimes in small towns, if there's 2 dental offices and somebody goes down the street, the odds are somebody's going to figure it out. And I know it's tough to play in the same sandbox sometimes. You're trying to keep everything nice, but that one's a tough call. If it's a close call, if there's patient threat, tell us. If it's a close call, then your ethical role kicks in. And, the reality is if you report and nothing comes of it, you get to shrug your shoulders and wash your hands and say, well, I did everything I could and the board didn't do anything, but that's all I did. So you can walk away with clean hands in that scenario. So that's typically what I tell people. You're not going to get in trouble from saying anything, and you could walk away from it and go, well, the board didn't do anything. I blame them. And then you can try to get on the board and fix it if you feel like you want to.
Lane, I'm just going to do one more question and then we're
Sure.
going to end this thing up. It has to do with fee splitting. And really the question is just simply, what do you mean by you can't split fees?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So this question usually comes up in your giveaways. So you can split fees with your associates, with your staff and all of that. But usually the question comes up in giveaways. So I've seen dental offices give away television, Starbucks cards, movie tickets, because you're just trying to drive new patients in. And what have you. But the reality is, if you say, hey, recommend us on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, Instagram or Snapchat or whatever, there needs to be some notification that if the referral, so if you say, hey, Sally Sue, tell your 10 best friends and I'll give you a Starbucks card or I'll give you a flat screen television, everybody needs to know that there's going to be something going on. So I've had dental offices. What I've even done is just say, hey, if you want to give away that TV, there's nothing wrong with doing that. Everybody has to know, the patient has to know, and everybody has to know that part of what Sally paid to your office may be returned back to her in the form of a television or Starbucks card or movie ticket or what have you. I've even seen one dental office give away a cruise, but they had a big drawing. And what that office did was put the statute out. I said, you can't go wrong with citing the statute, even if people don't understand it. The reality is you can say, here's the state law and here's what I can do. And then at that point, if everybody has knowledge of what's going on, the statute says you're in compliance. But if nobody has any idea what's going on, you can be charged with fee splitting. So I hope that helps.
Very good. Hey, I know that there's at least one more question hanging out there, but I tell you, we're getting to be 8:15. I tell you what, the couple questions that are still out there, I'll answer.
Okay.
Personally myself here later. So with that, everyone, thank you for all of you that were online today. Lane, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight and work through this with everyone. And with that, hey, we're gonna let you go. Good night and have a good evening. Happy Thanksgiving.
Yeah, happy Thanksgiving. Great holidays. Take care, folks.